know, how many people in the room own a power drill? Raise your hand. A lot. It looks like 85, 90% of people in the room. So it might surprise you to know that the average power drill gets used for approximately 12 minutes in its entire lifetime. Yeah, that's 12 minutes before it ends up in a landfill. Obviously, that's not really the most efficient use of resources. So I have a good friend. He's an environmentalist and a futurist. His name is Alex Steffen. He's a co-founder of worldchanging.com. And he likes to ask the question, do you really need the power drill or do you need the hole in the wall? So Neighborgoods hooks you up with the hole in the wall, right? So we connect neighbors and friends to save money and resources by sharing physical goods. So the whole idea is, how many lawnmowers do you really need to have on a single block, right? So you can share lawnmowers, power tools, bikes, sporting equipment. Media is really popular, video games, books, that sort of thing. Our most popular categories are sort of our household gear, like power tools and vacuums. One of the most requested items on the site is a power washer or a steam cleaner. So if you have one of those, it would be very popular in your neighborhood. I'm currently borrowing my friend Claire's Xbox and a whole slew of games from various people on Neighborgoods. I just lent out a giant bin of costumes for Burning Man. So there's really a wide range of things being shared on Neighborgoods. And we're part of this sort of emerging trend that's been dubbed collaborative consumption. You guys in this room are pretty forward-thinking. You've probably heard of it. It's also known as the sharing economy in investor circles. And so this is basically the idea is that in times of economic uncertainty, people come together to sort of utilize, bartering and social capital and other ways of getting access to the things they need besides money. And the idea is we're sort of moving to an economy of access as opposed to ownership. So Airbnb, also couch surfing are examples of this, where they're focused on sharing, your couch or your home, your apartment. We also have relay rides and get around, and they're focused on peer-to-peer rentals of your car. At Neighborgoods, we're focused more, like I said, household equipment, video games, that sort of thing. We are a pioneer of the movement. We have many thousands of users all over the country sharing almost $4 million worth of stuff. It's been a big year for us in 2011. We actually won the award for Best Bootstrap Startup at South by Southwest. There's this Microsoft BizSpark startup competition. And we were recently featured as one of 100 most brilliant companies of 2011 in Entrepreneur Magazine. So that's exciting. So where did the idea come from? This is me and my friend Tom in Thailand. We're at a bar called Ting Tong. So when I was getting ready to go for this trip, I needed a backpack, right? And I knew I'm not a backpacker. This isn't something I'm probably going to do really frequently, maybe once, twice. So I asked around to see if any of my friends had a backpack, and there was no really efficient way to find one in the short amount of time that I had to plan my trip. So I ended up buying one for about $200. And I knew when I bought it that I was only going to use it once. And, $200 is a lot of beer in Thailand. So I started doing some research. And I realized that that's true for most of the stuff we own. We're really inefficient owners here in America. 80% of the stuff we own gets used less than once per month. If you think about it, just take a second to visualize your own house or apartment and all the stuff that's there in your closet, in your garage, all the books on your shelves. People use their bikes a lot here, but maybe your bike hasn't been used recently. The sporting equipment, all these things that sit in your house that go untouched, collecting dust. We own so much stuff in America that we spend $22 billion a year in self-storage space. I did a little more research, and I found out, according to the American Self-Storage Association, I was shocked that even exists, but it does. According to them, there's enough self-storage space in this country. There's 7.5 square feet for every man, woman, and child. So I started thinking about the latent value hidden in all that stuff, sort of the potential energy, that's sitting in those storage spaces. Obviously, there's the financial value in that stuff. We save money by sharing. But I started thinking about it a little further, and I started thinking about the social capital that's hidden in that stuff, the social value. By sharing those goods with your neighbor, it provides the opportunity to pave the way for a real trusting relationship, a relationship that can improve the quality of the neighborhood, your life, and the economy. So this is the backpack that I bought. And I've now lent it out 3 times on Neighborgoods. It was actually one of my first transactions. And the very first person who asked me to borrow this, it was right after the earthquake in Haiti. And he said he was going down, he was volunteering with an NGO to distribute food to refugees. And he wanted to use my backpack to do it. I was like, are you kidding? Like, that's exactly why I built this website. Like, talk about getting the social value out of this backpack that otherwise would be sitting in my closet. I mean, that's a really extreme example, but it's a real one, and just sort of illustrates the real benefit of Neighborgoods. So for every power drill that you share with a neighbor, every item you share, it's one less thing that's getting put into the system, right? It's one less thing that's getting produced, purchased, shipped, and eventually thrown into a landfill. In the case of a power drill, the average power drill costs about $100. It takes about 1 kilogram of carbon to produce it and ship it to you. And so if you share that 10 times, you're saving your neighbors $1,000 and a little bit of carbon. But if you extend that out to like the whole network, our average user is sharing about $230 worth of inventory. If they share all of those items once a year, you're talking about saving millions of dollars and potentially keeping tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. So the environmental and the financial benefits of sharing are quite plain. They're very tangible. But even with all that said, to me, the most interesting piece of what happens when you share is the social piece. It's the community building. By sharing physical goods, we actually provide the opportunity to rebuild trust in local neighborhoods, and that's been degrading over recent decades. And it works. Again, I'll use my own example. Not surprisingly, my neighborhood has a very active Neighborgoods sharing group. I live in a neighborhood called Atwater Village in LA. It's a small, walkable community. We have an active farmer's market, lots of young families, little dogs. You can picture it. And I didn't know anybody when I moved there. I started Neighborgoods just around the time that I moved into the neighborhood. And now I'm involved in the neighborhood council. I know all the active people nearby. I've made really great, strong relationships through using this service. There's one neighbor in particular who watches my dog whenever I leave town. He's making sure I don't get a parking ticket right now because of street cleaning. And that's because of Neighborgoods. So, and again, there's also now the sort of the neighborhood council piece of it. So if you think of Neighborgoods as a way to create more connected, engaged citizenry, I'm sort of the prime example of that working. There's tons of research that shows in recent decades that we're actually, the social capital has been waning in local communities. There's a recent article put out by State Farm, a research piece that says 75% of Americans don't know our neighbors' names. So as we've become an increasingly commercial society, an individualistic society, due partially because of advertising, we spend less time in community efforts and more time working, shopping, and then building fortresses like that to protect our stuff from our neighbors. At Neighborgoods, we want to turn that around. And it has really big implications. So neighborhoods that are more connected they're safer, there's less crime, people are happier, they actually do better economically. Even the Department of Homeland Security says that social capital is the greatest predictor for how well a community will recover after a natural disaster. This is, again, Department of Homeland Security. Recovery from natural and other disasters does not depend on the overall amount of aid received or on the amount of damage done by the disaster. Instead, social capital, the bonds that tie citizens together, functions as the main engine of long-term recovery. So, you're just talking about sharing a couple power drills, but if you really think about, the impact of not just Neighborgoods, but Neighborgoods and Airbnb, Neighborgoods and couch surfing, and this whole movement that's emerging, it actually has the potential to really improve things. So how do we do that? How do we build trusting, sharing communities? According to Wikipedia, 4 things are required to build a real trusting relationship. What I think is the most interesting about this, and they all sort of say the same thing, is that in order to build a real trusting relationship, there actually is required some sense of vulnerability, some sense of risk. And if you think about those team building exercises, if you've ever worked in a corporate environment and you had to do like that trust fall thing where everyone catches you if you fall backwards, everybody hates those, but the reason they exist is the idea of if we didn't catch you, you would fall, right? Otherwise, there's no trust. It's that risk that brings the trust. And so, when you're sharing things, whether it's a power drill or your apartment, there is some element of risk in that. That element of risk is what enables you to build the real trusting relationship. If you think about it, when you go buy something from the store, this sort of separation between customer and company eliminates that risk, right? I'm going to buy something from you. If it's faulty, I know you're going to refund my money, so I'm not building any real relationship there. But when you're talking about peer-to-peer relationships, there is more risk, there's less guarantee, and I actually think that that's where the reward comes from. So then it's our job at Neighborgoods and other sharing communities to mitigate that risk just enough that the transaction happens. We know now that most of the transactions actually do go really well. We've seen this, the history of Craigslist and eBay and all of these services have been around for a while. People are afraid of them when they're new, and then they're not new anymore, and people are like, oh yes, of course that works, right? So we actually know that most of these transactions do go well. So then it's our job to give you the tools to mitigate the risk enough to enable that transaction to happen. And we do that in three main ways: information, reputation, and verification. I'm going to start with reputation because it's actually the most obvious. We have certain tools. We're all really familiar with social networking now. So eBay made the sort of peer ratings and reviews really popular. We all understand how those work. We now have the benefit of Facebook and LinkedIn to tell us what friends we have in common. That's an important social cue to build trust. And increasingly, we're becoming really familiar with sort of online social games and reputation points and badges. And so we're sort of utilizing a combination of those things to build our reputation system on Neighborgoods. Verification, this is the sort of external piece. What can Neighborgoods do to help you trust this person? Right now we do an address verification. So we send a code to your house and you type in the code and then it tells your neighbors that you live in the neighborhood. Other services do credit card verification. We're looking into that. We also, when someone requests to borrow an item from you on Neighborgoods, we share their cell phone number with you automatically. We believe, we're trying to get people in touch and build relationships, so we're looking at a cell phone verification as well. That way, when you see that cell phone number and it's verified, if something goes wrong, if they don't show up on time, that you can actually contact that person. And then the third, which is the first on there, is information. And I say this one last because it's actually the least obvious. It seems like the most obvious, it's actually the least obvious. So we spend all this time, designing these really beautiful, slick websites with verification and all these tools to make you feel safe. And there's a danger in that, which is that our users can sort of forget that they have to do the work. On Craigslist, you know what you're getting into, right? The design of that site or the lack of it. And I'm not saying that pejoratively. I'm just saying, when you go to Craigslist, you know that it's sort of the Wild West, and you know that you need to do your due diligence and make sure that this person is trustworthy and not fall for scams. And you have all of these, you just sort of learn how to do that. And on these newer services, because we're sort of taking the design to the next level and we're using the social tools to the next level, it's important for us to remember that we also have to remind our users that there is some risk. And then we can give them tools and tips for how to mitigate that, which I just sort of went through. So for us, I just think that information is actually the sort of most important piece, and it's the most easy to forget when you're trying to build really smooth transactions. And then finally, if something does go wrong, you need some system for dispute resolution. We actually haven't had to use this yet in the 2 years that we've been operating. But it's our approach to sort of, because again, we're about building relationships, we try to keep the dispute resolution in the hands of the users as much as possible. We get involved when we need to, but we basically give you sort of the peer-to-peer tools to take care of it yourself. One of my favorite features, which nobody's had to use, thankfully, is the panic button. So if you're involved in an active transaction and someone doesn't show up or they're late returning your thing, you push the panic button on that transaction, and what it does is it puts a big public alert on their profile that says, Micki didn't return my lawnmower, right? And so now everyone in the neighborhood knows I didn't return your lawnmower, and I have to fix that with you, and then you can remove the alert from my profile. So yeah. And again, no one's had to use that yet, but we do get involved when we have to. So for us, it's definitely more, we give you the tools that you need to feel safe, and so that you can sort of manage it yourself, and then we get involved when we need to. So then our mission, again, in the end, is really to build stronger relationships in local communities by connecting neighbors to help each other. I really appreciate your time. Thanks.